Hello everyone, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and Happy New Year to everybody. Today is the first day of 2018. It is New Year's Day. I hope you all had a great end to your 2017 and a glorious beginning to 2018. 2017 was a big year for the channel, a big year for strategy games in general, and I'm really looking forward to see what 2018 brings. This video is going to be looking at my top 5 most anticipated strategy games of 2018, now that we're into the beginning of this year. And I actually had a bit of difficulties putting together this list. Usually most years, to me, it feels like I don't know what's going to come out the following year, because in general, I feel like strategy games and war games in particular don't do a good job of announcing what's coming out anywhere beyond maybe a month. You usually very rarely hear about these games until they've come out, so it's hard to say what you're excited about next year. This list was a little bit different this year, though, because I actually had 10 or 11 games that I'm really excited to see what comes out. One or two of them I had on my list last year, so I didn't include them because who knows if they'll even really come out this year. I had put it in their 2017, they got pushed and delayed to 2018, and now, you know, there's some uncertainty around some of those games. Additionally, there have been some other games that have been announced, but it wasn't really clear, and I'll just say it outright, Rule the Waves 2 was announced as, you know, in development, but as far as when that's coming, I have no clue. And then there were some other games that, frankly, I just had to sort of rank what I was genuinely excited about. So there were a few games that I heard about that I think I'll dabble in, but that I'm not terribly vested in how they turn out. You know, there's a strategy game called Soviet City, Age of Empires 4. The Age of Empires series is restarting. Those are some interesting games, but I don't know, you know, if they really rate in my top 5. So really what this list is looking at is they're looking at the 5 games that I am most excited about, the 5 games that I think I will play the most, I will enjoy the most when they come out, based on the limited information that we know. So really this is highly subjective, obviously. It's my own personal list, and I'm just kind of curious of what's coming, and I've got some games that I'm excited about and I want to talk about, and so I hope you guys enjoy this video. Also, of course, please at the end, feel free to leave your thoughts below. Let me know if these games are games that you're excited about, or if there's other games that I didn't touch on that that you think should have been in this list. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and sit back, and we will just jump right into the list. Number 5 on my list, and the first up, is going to be Cold Waters China, or maybe Cold Waters South China Sea, based on the way they're describing it. This is going to be, and I don't know if it's paid or free, they've just said that the developers, Killerfish Games, are working on a new campaign which will be based in the South China Sea and will be coming with a new naval conflict set in the early to mid-1990s. They're working on adding various vessels of the People's Liberation Army Navy, that's the Chinese Navy, that will support such a new campaign. So Cold Waters, if you're not familiar with it, is developed by Killerfish Games. It's a game that came out in 2017, actually. I played a ton of on my channel. It was my number 2 game of 2017, and it puts you in the shoes of a submarine captain in kind of a third-person shooter environment where you're controlling the submarine with sort of WSAD keys, but does a really good job of making an authentic feeling Cold War gone hot war game, which you're an American submarine captain during a hypothetical 1960s or 1980s conflict where the Cold War turned into World War III. And you've got various missions like sinking submarines that are carrying special forces, sinking ballistic missile subs, sinking invasion fleets, those kind of things, all that you're tasked with. The game is a real-time game and does have a really authentic feel to it. You know, there's nothing quite like being pinned down by enemy sonar buoys as you're trying to infiltrate through a line of enemy surface vessels to knock out an enemy invasion convoy, or, you know, trying to shift your course enough to get a better fire control solution on an enemy submarine. It does a lot of things right. It's a game that's great that already came out, but this new content that they've announced is going to add a new war, and it will be in China. So it's a DLC is kind of how I'm phrasing it in this, given we really don't know a lot about it yet. And I'm really looking forward to it. I loved the original Cold Waters, so I think that a new campaign with new vessels, new submarines, new adversaries could be a lot of fun, and I will end up spending a lot of time playing. I do have some reservations. I'm not sure an early to mid-1990s conflict is really all that exciting from a challenge standpoint. One of the things that I think the two campaigns that came with Cold Waters did a really good job of doing is they gave you unique challenges to each. The 60s campaign, the enemy was less deadly, but your own submarines were vastly less potent. Their torpedoes were ineffective, they were inaccurate, you had to get in really close. The technology disparity wasn't there as much, but it sort of compensated it by weapons being less deadly against you. The 80s campaign was kind of the opposite of that. Enemy weaponry was much more deadly, but you had a little bit of a technological superiority over the Soviets in the 80s. Your weapons were vastly better. They had better weapons as well. And it sort of added additional challenges like launching tomahawks and other things like that. The 1990s conflict against China, I assume it'll be over the Taiwan Strait, but other than the fact that you're going to be really close in, and presumably there will be a lot of enemy aircraft activity operating against you, this is, I think, I don't know how I feel about the setting, because the Chinese Navy in the 1990s was vastly inferior to the United States Navy. And if you're, again, because of the way the game's saying this will be fought, you're going to be coming from the perspective of an American submarine captain, likely commanding a Los Angeles class or a Los Angeles class improved submarine, or even maybe a Seawolf class submarine, and you're not going to have a lot of technical challenges from the enemy, as far as I can gather. So I worry this will become too much of a shooting gallery and not a challenging enough game. But we'll see how that all plays out. I would like to see a more modern conflict with China in this game. I think that would be really intriguing and a very big challenge, if it was a modern day one. But in the mid-1990s, hopefully it doesn't turn into SSN. It's interesting because the developers were clearly inspired by Red Storm Rising, which was a Tom Clancy book which came out about basically the hypothetical Third World War that happens in the 1980s campaign in the original Cold Waters. He also wrote a book, Tom Clancy, called SSN, which was about a hypothetical mid-1990s conflict or late 1990s conflict between the United States and China. So I don't know if this is being inspired by that. Maybe it'll actually be a fight over the Parcel Islands or the Spratly Islands. In either event, the fact that I've been talking about this for 5+ minutes shows you that I'm really intrigued and excited about this. I have some reservations, but I also have some high hopes that this will be a challenging and fun game. So we'll see how it all works out. That's enough about that, though. So let's move on to number 4. At number 4 is another DLC pack. It is Hearts of Iron 4 Waking the Tiger. This will be a DLC pack for the original Hearts of Iron 4 game, which will really shift the focus a bit to the Pacific, to the Asia-Pacific region, and I think that's exciting. If you remember back to 2016, one of my favorite games of that year was Hearts of Iron 4, and I know that game had some criticism around it. Some folks felt that it wasn't detailed enough, it didn't have enough of the feel of the old Hearts of Iron game. I didn't feel that way, but I also didn't play those original games all that much either. This game does seem like it's going to be adding a little bit more depth, the DLC pack that is. It's going to be adding something called decisions, which allow you to spend political power on national decisions or missions to sort of alter your war effort. Going to be doing things like a more focused tech trees for certain countries like Germany and Japan, which will open up alternative history paths, which could be pretty interesting. I think the idea of having a Germany that overthrows Hitler or a Japan that tries to restore democracy could be really interesting. But really the reason this game is on the list, the reason this DLC pack is on the list, is it's going to add a national focus tree for China. I just finished reading a book called Forgotten Ally, which is about the Chinese war effort in World War II. And I think the conflict in China generally gets a really short shrift when you look at that. It was a titanic struggle during World War II between Japan and China, and it started in 1937, 2 years before the war breaks out in Europe. China and Japan are already at each other's throats. So I'm intrigued to see how this all works, because to this point, China really doesn't have a tech tree specific to them. They don't have sort of a historical tree focus to them. So it'll be focus tree. So it'll be, I think, a lot of interesting components could be added. How are they going to handle or change how the Chinese communists and the Chinese nationalists are addressed. If you start in the earlier campaign, is there still that sort of civil war going on between China and the communists, but now you also have to deal with Japan? There's a lot of really interesting decisions that would have to be made by China and were made by China during World War II. How does China's relationship with the West evolve? How does China internally deal with the fact that it's divided amongst itself while it's being attacked by Japan? I think a Chinese-focused DLC pack is well worth the effort, and I'm really excited to see how they addressed all of this, because there's a lot of very unique pieces to the Chinese-Japanese conflict that in many ways kind of made it its own war, its own struggle, but in which the other allies also came in on the side, not necessarily on the side of China, but fighting against the same adversary as China. So Waking the Tiger, I don't know a ton about it other than just kind of some of those brief things I read off the product page, but I think it's exciting to be able to really give the emphasis and focus to China that it deserves in a DLC pack for Hearts of Iron, because when you talk about how bloody and how destructive the conflict between Germany and Russia was, sort of the stereotypical Eastern Front, well, Japan's Eastern Front, obviously not geographically, but sort of the equivalent to Japan's Russian front, Germany's Russian front to Japan, was the fight against China, which devoured vast sums of resources for Japan, but was a life or death titanic struggle for the Chinese, in which the ruling party in China, the preeminent party in China, the nationalists, were so gravely weakened, and they had exerted so much effort during the conflict that it really caused China itself, to the nationalist party, to have really a hollowed-out base of support to try and fight the war against the communists once the Second World War ended. So I'm encouraged to see this. I want to see how it all plays out, but I think this is an interesting DLC pack looking at a underrepresented theater in World War II, and I'm excited to be able to play it. Number 3 in my list is a game that's coming out about the Cold War, and it's a game called Armored Brigade, which was apparently some sort of freeware game that had been developed over several years, which allowed you to simulate armored combat during the Cold War as if World War III had broken out. But now, in partnership with Matrix and Slytherin Games, the developer is polishing everything up, making it more fully featured, and turning the game into a paid release. And this game looks really, I don't know if it's different. It reminds me of Command Modern Air Naval Operations, but looking more specifically at ground combat, which that game does not do particularly well, nor does it really try to do. This game is a real-time, or it will be, a real-time tactical war game, and I'm quoting from the game's website, focusing on realism and playability. The game has drawn inspiration from classics such as Steel Panthers, Close Combat, and Combat Mission. And I will say, from the initial screenshots, which admittedly are in alpha stage, this game looks a lot like a more modern close combat game. It's kind of got that 2D top-down look, and again, the game is in alpha, but looks at combat from anywhere between 1965 and 1991. It has a real-time engine. It will have a quasi-dynamic campaign with sort of this overarching huge map that then you can zoom in on in specific spots and see actual specific units, but then zoom back out to the operational level. In a lot of ways, in that sense, it looks like something as if Command tried to tackle detailed tactical combat. The game apparently is trying to be a Cold War combat simulator with an emphasis on armored, but not exclusively armored combat. Obviously, during the Cold War, any kind of hypothetical war would have been pretty heavily involved in combined arms tactics. Artillery, close air support, air-to-air engagements, air defense engagements, all are possible. Things like fortifications, obstacles, breaching, time of day, night vision equipment, all these sort of expectations, I guess, that you would have in terms of modern combat appear to be represented in this game. It will be looking at, the typical U.S. versus USSR, West versus East, NATO countries versus Warsaw Pact countries. So that it removes a little bit of the excitement for me just because I've seen that done so many times. But I haven't seen a really good armored combat game from a operational and tactical perspective outside of like Steel Panthers, Pro BE, or not Steel Panthers, Steel Beasts. I haven't really seen that done a whole lot, and I've never really played Steel Beasts. That's more of a, tank simulator by itself. This, again, has a very close combat feel from what I'm looking at. So I'm really excited about this. I don't know a ton about it. I'm not even sure if it's coming out in 2018 for sure. All the screenshots that have been provided have been in alpha stage. But I like the idea of this, and I like the idea of this grand operational map that then I can zoom in on its specific units that go down to the tank or individual team unit level. I like the idea of real-time, tactical, Cold War gone hot combat, and I'm really intrigued to see how all this works together. Will it feel like the book Team Yankee, or will it be more of a dud? I guess we'll see, but I'm looking forward to it. Again, not a ton of information out about this. There's been some interviews with the developer and other things like that, but frankly, just not a ton of information out there about the game quite yet. No gameplay imagery outside of individual stills taken from alpha footage. Nonetheless, I'm excited about it, and I can't wait to see what Armored Brigade turns into. Number 2 on my list is going to be a new game out by Creative Assembly, the newest of the Total War games, and it's going to be a new class of games for Creative Assembly. The game is Thrones of Britannia Total War Saga, and this game is going to be taking a look at the British Isles, specifically, before the Norman conquests, starting in 878 AD, lasting for about 200 years, and it's going to be pitting all the various different kingdoms or parties in the British Isles vying for control of those islands. I think it's a really interesting approach for the Total War games. Typically, when you think of Total War, you think of medieval Total War, Rome Total War, Shogun, these games that encompass hundreds of years of history over a wide geographic region, less so with Shogun, and sort of this era-specific history, like Crusader Kings or something else like that. Rome looking from the 200s all the way up to the early ADs, several hundred years covering all of Europe. Empire doing the same thing across the globe. Medieval Total War covering even a longer period of history, several hundred years, over all of Europe. The Total War Saga games, what Creative Assembly has said they're looking to do at these games, is of which Thrones of Britannia is the first one, or will be the first one, is they're looking at honing in on specific areas of the world over a limited period of time, highly focused in on these periods of time, but these are important, consequential turning points in history. And frankly, I think the Total War games are actually better suited to that type of experiment or a type of game than they are with the Romes. One of the big issues that Empire Total War had was that it was trying to do way too much over way too vast a landscape, and it just didn't do anything particularly well. When they took Empire and they made it more focused, you could say the Total War Saga game has already been done once, and that's because, or more than once, and that's because Empire was sort of this vast pre-Napoleonic, but still sort of that linear combat world of a Total War game. They then went from Empire to Napoleon, which was a targeted look at just Europe and just looking over about a 20-year period of history in Europe. And that's kind of what they're doing here. It's a longer period of time, but they're just looking at the British Isles. And sort of this is the idea for Thrones of Britannia and the Total War Saga series, is this really focused look. And frankly, I think that's what Total War games do the best. My favorite Total War game of all time was Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion, which admittedly looks at all of Europe, but it looks over a more limited period of time as the Roman Empire crumbles. The Total War folks did that again with Total War Attila, where they looked at the Roman Empire during the reign of Attila, a very narrow geographic time frame. There were other DLC packs like The Last Roman to Attila, which looked at sort of the campaigns of Basilaris, which again was a narrow focus. It was a wide map, but a narrow focus. Now they're appearing to take a narrow focus on the geographic region, although the map is reported to be huge. It's just the sort of historical geographic region is relatively small compared to what they usually do, and yet also targeting in on a more specific period of time. I don't know a ton about the British history piece of it. I know that there are Vikings fighting, there are Saxons fighting, there are Welsh, there's Scottish, there's Irish, there's all these different interesting clans kind of fighting amongst each other. But what really intrigues me is this idea of almost more like an operational grand campaign. Operational in the sense of you're looking at a specific geographic region and you don't do it over very long. And I think that's really, frankly, where the Total War games shine. When they hone in on something, provide a little bit more detail, they don't try and over-engineer it, they don't try and cover the vast landscape of the whole world or all of Europe. What I think they do really well is targeted games. And that's what this game is supposed to be. That's what the whole Total War saga is supposed to be. So I'm excited to see where Total War is headed, and I hope that we see more of this. And I guess we'll see how this translates and how well it does, and how people resonate with it. But at the very least, I'm excited to see what comes out of this, because I think this is the right direction for the historical Total War games to go. And I think sometimes maybe on some of these bigger games, they get a bit of feature creep where they just keep trying to add different things or different factions or different time frames. And I like the idea of saying, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, we're not trying to cover everything, we're just trying to look at this one piece of time with these conflicting parties, and let's see how good we can do with it. And I think that's an encouraging step. As a side note, I really feel like Thrones of Britannia is almost going to have a Game of Thrones vibe to it, where you've got multiple different parties all vying for one crown. I haven't seen Total War do that sort of infighting since really the original Total War, where you had the three families all fighting for the role of Rome, but that was too large, too vast, too all-encompassing. I think these are going to be natural opponents of each other from the get-go, and I think that really could be intriguing, and also might open up a multiplayer campaign piece to it that could be really interesting if that's something that they add. With that being said, just look for it, I believe, early to middle of 2018, Thrones of Britannia, Total War Saga. I'm really excited to see what comes out of this, and that is my number 2 most anticipated game of 2018. And now, my most anticipated game of 2018, Burden of Command, a new game that's being worked on that really seems to be trying to be a leadership role-playing World War II game. Something that I haven't seen before. When I put together this list, one of the things that I kind of did was I wrote this list a few times, and there's a few games that were on it that then got moved around, and originally Burden of Command wasn't my most anticipated game, but when I stopped to think about it, when I was ranking these games, and I stopped to think about, all right, what is my most anticipated game, I thought, what game has me the most excited, but also why does it have me the most excited? So, for example, Hearts of Iron 4. I'm really excited about Waking the Tiger, the look at China in the Hearts of Iron 4 world. I'm really excited about Cold Waters expanding to the South China Sea. But when I really think about those games, the reason they're further down on the list is I've played those games before. I've played Cold Waters. I know what that looks like. I'm excited for a new campaign. I'm excited for new challenges. But fundamentally, it's a game I've seen before. It's a game I've done before. It's a game I've played before. The same is true for Hearts of Iron. Even Total War Saga, even though it's a different type of Total War game, I've played a Total War game before, so I know what that looks like. What makes Burden of Command different is, and again, Armored Brigade, to be fair to that as well, I've played a close combat game before, so I have a sense of what that looks like. But what Burden of Command is, and the reason this is number 1, is it's trying to do something that I've never seen done well before. It's trying, and again, there's very little information that's been provided. There's a website, there's a trailer that you see here, but there's very little gameplay that's been shared to this point to say, what is this game really going to be? It appears to be a tactical World War II game with a hex basis of which you lead a small unit formation through various scenarios and challenges in a linked campaign that goes from the beginning of the war, starting in North Africa, all the way through to the conclusion of the war. That's what it appears to be. But it's more than a turn-based tactical game on a hex map. It is, and it could be real-time for all I know. It looks like it's turn-based based on what I'm looking at, but I suppose it could be real-time. I haven't seen anything indicating. Oh no, it says turn-based right here. So it is turn-based. But what I'm intrigued by is the leadership role-playing game element, and that comes across very strongly in the trailer. You get these little pop-ups that come up making you make leadership decisions. So you've got a turn-based game. It's going to have tactical combat. You know that. It's got hexes. You know that. But now they're trying to add this leadership component in. This building a relationship with your troops. They're trying to tell a story of leadership and how you do in various leadership positions. Are you sort of the mission comes first leader that sacrifices his men's lives left and right just to accomplish the mission? Or are you a little bit more conscientious? Or are you somewhere in between? Would you easily give up, or would you, press through and get all of your men killed to accomplish the objective? Is the objective worth the cost? Essentially, what it's trying to do is it's trying to say your character, your player, the player you represent in this game has to be a leader. And I've never seen a World War II game do that before. Call of Duty, one of the things that's always sort of a huge turnoff for that series, and I know it's not a war game, but for that series, is how stilted the characters, how perfect the characters are, or how dramatically flawed the characters are. There really is never any emotional connection to your characters. You're a super soldier, and there's a little bit of background noise around the actual campaign, but at the end of the day, your character doesn't have emotions. You have no real attachment to your AI characters. Sure, someone may die, someone may live, but you don't really care. They're perfect soldiers, or they're there's just so many stereotypical archetypes in that game that it fails to resonate. It fails to build a connection. It doesn't feel human. It doesn't feel real. It's superficial. And the one game that I've played that kind of did a better job of that, I think, and it was largely because of how well written it was the Brother in Arms games. So Brother in Arms Road to Hill 30, Brother in Arms Hell's Highway. Those games did a really good job of trying to give you a sense of connection with your characters. And those are real-time first-person shooters, but they had story and a good deal of good writing behind them. So that was one game that did this to some extent. But you weren't really in charge. Things weren't really dynamic. It was, a set storyline with a very clear ending and a very clear linear path to get there. There was no failure. And this game appears to embrace the idea of failure, appears to embrace the idea of choice. So in that way, maybe it's like some of those branching role-playing games that you see for Game of Thrones or for The Walking Dead, where you have to make decisions and those will influence the outcome. Now, a lot of those types of games, the problem is, you don't have too much divergence in your options, because things get way too hard for them to write different outcomes based on your choices. We'll see how consequential your choices feel in this game, but the reason I'm excited about this is it's a tactical, turn-based war game on a hex map, World War II, small units, and specifically this leadership element, trying to understand what this is really going to look like, trying to understand if this really kind of gets across the dilemma of leadership. Never before have I played a war game where I worried about a soldier that I got killed, an AI sprite. Never before have I played a war game where I felt like my decisions really mattered in terms of how my characters were going to end up at the end of it. And I hope this game does that. I hope this game really makes you get a sense. Obviously, nothing really can, shy of being in a leadership position in a high stress or conflict environment. But I really hope this models some of the dilemmas of command and really gets you to understand the stress of command when you hold other people's lives in your hands, but you have the mission, you have the orders. Can it make us resonate with our characters and agonize over our decisions because those decisions are meaningful and have impact? To me, that seems what this game is going to try and get across, and I'm really excited to see if they can do it. If it's bad writing, if there's not enough options, if your decisions don't have consequence, then it may fail in those regards, and that would be a shame. But I'm glad to see someone's trying to do it, because too many war games are, You've got this number of troops. You need to accomplish this objective. Try and get as few people killed as possible. But if they do die, who really cares as long as the mission's completed? It doesn't really hurt you other than your points are lower. It doesn't really influence you. You don't even know who those characters are. Maybe you used one of these units from time to time and you kind of built your own personal story around it, but really there's nothing in the game that causes you to build a connection. And I'm hoping this game is different. I'm hoping this game really makes you agonize over your decisions, really makes you feel the burden, as the game is titled, the burden of command. And that's why it is my most anticipated game of 2018. It will most definitely be featured on this channel, and we'll see how it all plays out. But with that being said, guys, that's my list. Burden of Command, the most anticipated game of 2018. The other games on the list are Total War Saga, Thrones of Britannia, Armored Brigade, Hearts of Iron 4, the Walking Tiger DLC, and the Cold Waters South China Seas game. That's my list, folks. Let me know your thoughts below. I'm really intrigued to know. You know, these games are, obviously, war games in particular are tough to say what you're most excited about because so often so little gets released about these games until a month before launch. But let me know, what do you guys think about this list? Do you think I missed the mark on anything? Do you agree with my reasoning? Are there games that I left off this list that you would have included? Please feel free to let me know. But with that being said, guys, I hope you guys are all off to a wonderful start to your new year. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.